Okay, podcast listeners, we're going to do something a little different this week. We had a proper constructed episode planned, but that's not going to happen for a couple of reasons. So instead, we are doing a film commentary.
If you like it, let us know. Maybe we'll do more in the future.
The film we'll be commentarying on is appropriate, since it's one of the first movies we ever talked about here on the podcast. And that is, of course, 1931's Universal classic horror film, Frankenstein, the film that is very dear to my heart. Well, if you're watching along with us at home, which we recommend you do, because otherwise it wouldn't really make a lot of sense, now would it? I am pressing play now. So we're going to talk over this film for you.
And to be clear, we are watching the Blu-ray version that was released in the big $100 set.
Yeah, that's previous October. The super duper Blu-ray set, which I've not seen before. So I'm looking forward to experiencing this film on Blu-ray.
And my personal experience, I have not yet watched this, even though I've owned it since October. My personal experience is these movies look gorgeous on Blu-ray, so I'm really excited to see how Frankenstein looks with all the atmosphere, as Zach likes to put it. Although the opening is gorgeous.
Yeah, the Universal logo, it's nice to see that on blue. Oh my goodness, look at that. That's pretty. I just upgraded to a Blu-ray player literally within the last week. So I'm not yet jaded to the joys of Blu-ray.
I'm slowly getting them their audience. Bear with us.
I'm stumbling into the 21st century.
So, did you ever finish watching The Avengers?
Yeah. How do you do? Mr. Carl Lindley. Of course, we're looking at James Wales, the director of the film, who was, if you've seen Gods and Monsters, which everybody but JD has, you'll know that James Wales was openly homosexual back in the 30s, which was quite a feat. And watching this opening, he does appear to be a little swishy.
Yeah, but it was the 1930s. Everybody's a little swishy.
No, men were men and women were nervous. Might shock you, may even horrify you. In a few minutes we're going to see, during the opening credits, we're going to see a brief glimpse at the original poster art for Frankenstein, which gives us a very human-looking monster. As I'm sure you know, JD, originally, right off the success of Dracula, Bela Lugosi was cast to play the monster in Frankenstein. Now, there are various rumors and myths as to why he turned down the part. The one I've always heard is that he didn't want to do it because there was no dialogue in the film for his role. I don't know if that's true or not personally.
I've always heard it was because he didn't want to be typecast.
Well, that's a possibility as well. For whatever reason, Lugosi wasn't cast in the film, and I believe James Wales first saw Boris Karloff during a play, and was so impressed with him that he cast an unknown truck driver from England in a part that would make him world famous and iconic.
Sorry, the spinning eyes are kind of messing with me there.
Of course, if Lugosi had been cast as the monster, horror history would be completely different. And one of the big ways it would have been different is the design for the monster, probably the most iconic horror history in the universe, would be completely different. There is a very famous makeup reel of Lugosi that existed at one point. I don't know if it still exists. If it does exist, there's been no release of it.
He closely resembled the Golem, didn't he?
Yes, his design was heavily based off of the 1920 German expressionistic film Das Golem, with a big, round, pageboy haircut. So say the people who have seen the test reel. As I pointed out, it probably doesn't exist anymore. And that certainly would have been different, since the flat top, bolts in the neck look is so perfectly iconic.
And it was Fritz in this movie, right?
Yes, Fritz.
Not Igor.
Yes, the doctor's assistant is Fritz. Igor would not come along until Son of Frankenstein, who was played by Lugosi. How do you think Lugosi would have done as the monster, JD?
I think I prefer Boris Karloff.
Well, Lugosi, of course, played the Frankenstein monster years later in Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman, but he was very stiff in that movie. He didn't do a very good job. But then again, that was Lugosi during his drug years. I feel like Lugosi in his prime probably would have been a decent monster. About a year later, I believe, he was in a film called Island of Lost Souls, where he was under a lot of heavy makeup playing the Sayer of the Law, and he was excellent in that film, so I think he probably would have been an interesting monster. This is gorgeous on Blu-ray, by the way, crystal clear.
I know, and you're jealous.
Speaking of German expressionistic film, expressionistic cinema obviously had a huge influence on these early Universal horror films. In this one in particular, you'll notice a few sets later on, like the dungeon in the castle. It has a very oddly centered window, and the castle itself has some off-center, rather expressionistic set design, heavily inspired by the Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, the most iconic German expressionistic film.
Man, that was a crazed look in that guy's eyes. He's all like, "Niece, master."
Not quite, but you'll notice here in a minute the doctor is going to literally throw dirt in Death's face.
Foreshadowing.
Spectres of Death really hang around the corner of this film in every scene. This opening graveyard scene, there's very famously the statue of the Grim Reaper. Later on, when we're in Edward von Sloan's college professor's office, you're going to see skulls on a shelf behind him. And of course, famously, when Fritz is absconding with the abnormal criminal brain, there's a skeleton right over his left shoulder. So,
Abnormal or abnormal?
abnormal, not abnormal.
I prefer abnormal. I am ashamed to admit that I actually saw Young Frankenstein before I ever saw Frankenstein, so...
Well, actually, I do believe I was maybe 7 years old when my dad rented this film, the original Frankenstein, from Blockbuster, so... I think I did see this before I saw Young Frankenstein.
Well, unfortunately for me, it was the other way around.
I think the scene of Fritz cutting the body down from the gallows was one of the numerous scenes from this movie that were cut out and edited during various re-releases in the 30s. Of course, in the 1930s, there was no national censorship board, but there were local state censorship boards. And this film was heavily cut by some local territories and outright banned in a few.
Yeah, it's really not that bad by today's standards.
Oh, no, not at all. But this scene where he cuts down the body and a later scene where you see a syringe inserted into the monster was cut. And, of course, the scene with the little girl was heavily cut. Ironically, cutting right from the time the monster reaches for the little girl raises much worse implications than actually showing him throwing her in the lake.
Yeah, I mean, that particular scene actually shows that the monster wasn't trying to kill the little girl, he was just, retard strength.
Well, the monster's a true innocent in the beginning, which is best shown in the scene where he steps out of the dungeon and sees the sun for the first time and tries to reach up and grab it, which is a beautiful moment and quite perfectly shows the innocence of the monster. There's the skeleton I was talking about on the bouncy string for some reason.
Well, apparently it's a prank.
I have no idea. Lots of peering over things in this early beginning. Edward von Sloan, of course, also played Van Helsing in Dracula.
Did he really?
Yeah, okay, you kiss my ass. Do you prefer Dwight Frye's Fritz or Dwight Frye's Renfield?
I think Renfield. But,
Well, obviously his Renfield is far more iconic, but...
But Dracula's my favorite out of the series, whereas Frankenstein's your favorite.
One of my favorites, yeah.
So, well, I'd say it's probably your favorite. Well, besides Creature from the Black Lagoon.
Those two tend to go head and head. This whole subplot about the abnormal criminal brain was actually added at the insistence of the studio. The original plan was for the monster to be a total innocent and slowly corrupted by the world that is, of course, cruel and rejecting of him, much like the original novel, but I guess the studios at the time insisted on some sort of moral lesson to the film.
Well, it would make sense, given the time period and all that.
Well, yeah, of course, this film was pre-code, and so these early 1930s horror movies can get away with quite a bit more than films that were made 10 years later could have. A good example is, as I've already mentioned, Island of the Lost Souls or The Black Cat, both of which are quite disturbing as far as content go, and rather surprising considering when they were made.
And do you feel Creature from the Black Lagoon suffered from being postcode?
Well, I don't know. It's hard to say. That film's a little bit subversive in other ways. They got away with a few things that maybe went underneath the censor's radar.
Oh.
Yeah, he just dropped the brain. The character of the Hunchback assistant was not in the original novel, of course. The character of the Hunchback assistant was actually added in one of the stage plays that served as the inspiration for this script. I believe the version the film primarily draws from, however, the assistant is actually mute, and the character was made a speaking role in order to capitalize on the sound, since sound was still and it's still in its early stages in 31, and still considered something of a novelty. And here's Elizabeth and the, as I like to call him, backup love interest. You see backup love interests in a lot of these movies from this era. Excuse me. Jesus. You see a lot of backup love interests from movies of this era because frequently the lead woman will be in love with a mad scientist, and naturally the mad scientist who tampered in God's domain has to be punished. So when he dies, there's a spare for her, so everybody gets a happy ending. Weirdly, this movie ends up subverting that, because there was a last-minute change to let Dr. Frankenstein live, even though it's pretty clear his fall from the burning windmill is fatal. Somehow he survives, and this additional character pretty much disappears at the end, and he's nowhere to be seen in the sequel.
Which is okay. I mean, he's not that important of a character anyway.
Not really. The Invisible Man is another good example of the backup love interest, where the mad scientist does die, and the leading woman does get... Actually, now that I think about it, she doesn't. Both of those films are directed by James Whales, which might account for their subversive attitudes in that regard.
Is it possible that James Whales is the heroine?
Well, I don't know. His sexuality might have some influence there on that decision. It's hard to say.
I mean, I'm just saying, maybe he's putting himself in heroine shoes, and, you know, the...
I doubt it, because the heroine isn't exactly a great character. She's not a bad character, but Elizabeth isn't much more than a damsel in distress.
She's not even really... I mean, she's not really, like, that she's prominent. And
she is briefly distressed towards the end of the second act. I've already said this, but this movie is beautiful on Blu-ray. It looks brand new. I can't believe a film that's 80 years old could look this good.
I mean, I'm telling you, you should see Bride. Like that part there where they got like the skull all stacked on the...
Yeah, well, Bride is a little more interesting as far as its direction goes. There's this conception of early sound cinema as being very stagey and stiff. I think Todd Browning's Dracula is probably a good example of that. But I rewatched the majority of these films, in fact, all of these films. And look at here the expressionistic set here of the angles and the roof. It's very expressionistic.
And if you notice, they form a pyramid. Which... And there's pyramids all throughout that scene, so clearly...
There's the skulls on the shelves behind Edward von Sloan.
There's also pyramids there, too, so...
Okay, enough. Enough with the secret Illuminati agenda, JD.
I mean, I'm just saying... Oh, and those circles make, like, eyes.
Okay, stop.
Is he using that one skull as, like, a lampshade?
That's what I was sitting here wondering. Is that skull a lampshade?
Because that is really freaking cool if it is.
You viewers watching along with us on the left side of the screen, look at that, and if you have an answer, write us and let us know.
Yes. On our email address.
Yes, which we have now.
bangersandmash88@yahoo.com.
I checked it the other day, and nothing.
Yeah, I've been checking it. I've got nothing.
Yeah, disappointing.
We haven't even gotten any hits on our Facebook page either.
I know. It's depressing. Oh, well.
I keep telling people.
We're not doing it for the love of the money. We're doing it for the love of the game.
You know, it's Facebook.com/ Bangers and Mash. So.
I believe it is the Bangers and Mash show. Just search for us. You can probably find us, maybe. Anyway.
In other words, guys, we want feedback. Say what?
I'm just quoting the movie.
Oh.
Something to understand about these early pre-nuclear films, electricity is frequently the MacGuffin used to bring the monster to life. In these Universal films, the rule quickly becomes that lightning can do anything, just like in the 1950s where nuclear energy could do anything. Which
is why, Rico Chapman gets turned into...
Oh, God.
Gets turned into the Gill Man in the House of the Gill Man.
Yes, our original screenplay.
Which is not posted yet, don't ask.
Here we are at the tower. A rather beautiful miniature. Extremely atmospheric. My God, the level of detail you can make out in these shots on Blu-ray.
I know, right?
Yeah. It's this tower that really has an expressionistic bent to it, almost as if the filmmaker was trying to intentionally invoke Henry's laboratory being some sort of alternate world where the rules are different. Particularly the patterns on the floor there that you notice are very diagonal and at odd angles against each other.
And form pyramids.
This lab equipment had quite a life after this film and was reused in multiple films. I know the last movie this original lab equipment was used in was the rather notorious Al Adamson's Frankenstein vs. Dracula from the 1970s, which is a terrible film from any sort of structural aesthetic level. Ironically, it was also one of Lon Chaney Jr.'s last films. It's odd that it's Henry Frankenstein and not Victor Frankenstein.
I know, it really messes with me too.
I don't know why they made that change.
And it's Frankenstein.
Personally,
I'm not a Frankenstein. I'm a Frankenstein.
Stop moving so much. The microphone's picking that up.
Oh, I'm sorry. I will say, though, What's-His-Face does a good job between playing the two henchmen. I can't remember his name off the top.
Dwight Frye.
Dwight Frye, yeah.
Well, he wasn't just in this one, of course. He's in the original Mummy as well at the very beginning. He's the archaeologist that goes
Well, yeah, but he, dies.
Well, he goes insane. He went for a little walk.
Yeah.
He also showed up in Frankenstein versus the Wolfman, I believe. Or was it House of Frankenstein? He's in one of the team-up movies.
Anyhow, he does a good job distinguishing a difference between the two characters, though.
Well, he was, like a lot of the actors in this film, he was a stage actor before this, and played a variety of different roles on stage, comical, dramatic parts. Of course, as with a lot of the actors in this movie, he was typecast as a horror actor following this film. Going back to the subject of Lugosi playing the monster, it's interesting to think how Lugosi was, of course, somewhat typecast, well, not somewhat, definitely typecast as Dracula following his performance, and it had a detrimental effect on his overall career. Why Karloff remained relevant and a viable working actor well into the 50s. And it's interesting to think if Lugosi had been cast as the monster, how his career would have been affected, and whether or not Karloff would have come to prominence at all.
Yeah, but seeing the original makeup design for the Lugosi creature...
There's another pyramid, JD, if you're keeping count.
There's actually 2. Or 3. Oh, wait, there's a 4th. Anyhow, that makeup design, it just... I think even in this time period, that would look silly.
Interesting to think about. Obviously, the Frankenstein design is much more famous than the Das Golem design has ever been, so... it would have been a different world, I think.
There's 3 more pyramids there, by the way.
Well, this shot in general is gorgeous. The shot of Fritz descending the castle stairs. The contrast between shadow and light is so effective in this movie.
Would that be the atmosphere
yes,
you talk about?
It would be. Black and white is not always used well in these older films, but these early ones especially seem to really have a grasp on it.
Well, like in Dracula, when that first shot where you see Dracula,
Oh yeah,
and they're zooming in on his eyes, and they're just shimmering in the moonlight.
the shadows are incredible.
Gorgeous.
The shadows are incredible in Dracula. Todd Browning's frequently criticized for his direction in that film, but I personally think it's a little stronger than people give him credit for.
Well, his problem wasn't his direction; it was the time.
Well, there's a lot of discussion. Of course, Dracula was originally going to star Lon Chaney Sr., who passed away, and it was originally going to be a big-budget affair for Universal before the Great Depression and the Wall Street crash. So there's a lot of speculation that Todd Browning's lackluster direction on Dracula was because he was depressed that Chaney had died, and he wasn't making the film he had wanted to make. Of course, all that's speculation, so who knows for sure. And it's a different movie than the one we're watching.
Well, yeah.
It's odd to think about how quick turnaround was back in the day. Dracula was released in early 1931, while Frankenstein was released in the fall, with only maybe a few months between the end of production for one and then the release of the other. So it's sort of weird to think this whole movie was shot, cut, printed, and released in the span of maybe 4 months. Certainly couldn't do that today.
Well, yeah, but today you got, you know...
There's a lot more involved, a lot more people you have to pay.
A lot more people you have to pay. You can't just shoot on a set. You have to...
Yeah, stuff like that. It's silly.
You have to shoot on location nowadays.
It's more complicated than perhaps it should be.
And you have to use CGI for effects and...
So, when do you think this movie is meant to be set, JD? You think this is a period piece or a modern film? Quote-unquote modern.
Well, I think it was a modern film for the time.
Well, see, when I was watching the Universal series this previous October, I was trying to work out some sort of viable timeline, which was I put way more thought into it than the actual filmmakers did, I'm certain. But if you think about it, Son of Frankenstein is set in the modern day, when the son of Victor and Henry, of Henry and Elizabeth, that was Freudian, of the couple in the next film is in at the youngest, his 30s, maybe as old as his 40s, which means this film is set 30, 40 years before the modern day in Son of Frankenstein, which would be 1939 when it was released. So I always put this film at around the turn of the century, probably the early 1900s, late 1800s.
Or there is an alternate time dimension in Transylvania.
Well, this isn't set in Transylvania, this is set in Germany. In fact, later films retcon it as being set in the village of Frankenstein. The village in the first film has no name, though, so...
Well, maybe in Europe there's an alternate timeline. Or alternate time dimension.
The costumes are certainly very modern, but other things about the film are very antiquated, such as the town itself and how they...
Well, yeah, but, I mean, 1900s, I mean, the style didn't change all that. Didn't change a whole lot for, like, men.
Well,
the woman's fashion changed a little bit. I mean, they went from, like, flapper to... you know, but, like, from the 1900s on, I mean, fashion didn't change all that much. So,
I think you can pretty effectively fan-wank this movie as being set in the early 1900s without raising any red flags. Fashion didn't evolve that much in a 30-year period.
Yeah. Especially at that time. You know, it's not like nowadays where, you know...
Pop culture moves much faster.
You
Look
know,
at the light streaming in from the barred window there and how it forms a line across the opposite wall. Gorgeous. It's hard to say how much of this manipulation was intentional on the filmmaker's part and how much of it is just a happy accident. Either way, the movie certainly looks wonderful. Little details like that probably wouldn't be viewable on the DVD as opposed to the Blu-ray.
Man, you're really fan-waking this, this Blu-ray here, aren't you, Zach? I mean, I agree with you, it's beautiful, but...
I'm just saying there are details that are visible now that probably weren't previously.
Like the shadows on the back wall?
When anybody moves, yeah.
You know, you don't get that in movies nowadays because they use CGI to
to
take out really any unwanted shadows.
I don't know if they use CGI to take out shadows, but again, because this is in black and white, the contrast between light and darkness is much more prominent than it would have been otherwise. Any thoughts on Colin Clive as the Doctor, JD?
Well, I mean, he's iconic.
Yeah, he is. And I feel like he's somewhat overlooked in the pantheon of Universal actors. Colin Clive's personal life was somewhat complicated. He was supposedly an alcoholic and spent the latter half of his lives in and out of derelict homes because of it. It's a shame, really. He's very good in these films.
Yeah, I mean, I thoroughly enjoy his performance. I think he does a great job. And even to this day, I mean, anytime they make a Frankenstein movie, somebody yells out, it's alive!
Indeed.
So, I mean, I think it's because of him that you get that. I mean, even...
The shot of the monster being risen up through the tower roof is iconic and wonderful.
And even more iconic and wonderful on Blu-ray, right, Zach?
Exactly. I think it's a good example of how Whale's direction wasn't stationary and wasn't stiff. And I feel like that's a somewhat unfair reputation of early sound films.
And hopefully you'll get to hear it if you're not watching it along with us. His iconic yell here in a couple minutes.
Yeah, it'll be coming up. The sound quality for this episode is overall kind of crappy. We apologize. It's our first time. Be gentle.
What are you kidding, Zach? You like it rough.
So why did they left the top of the monster's head exposed in the wrappings?
They were afraid it'd mess up his hair.
Well, there's the "It's alive." Very quickly he's going to say, "Now I know how it must feel like to be God." Which was a much censored, contested line at the time. Frequently muted in many copies.
Well, luckily it's not muted on this copy.
No. The prominence of barons and bogomasters in this small German town speaks to me that the film is a somewhat mythic setting. You don't see a lot of barons or bogomeisters around these days, anyway. God, you can even make out the smoke rings from his fancy pipe there.
A little bit of a segue. But I saw his vest and that reminded me of something. I was watching costume design documentary for the X-Men movie.
Okay.
And they actually, I don't know if you knew it or not, but I wanted to tell you because it was pretty cool that I heard. They actually tailored his suit to be really super short.
Whose suit?
Professor Xavier, sorry. They tailored his suit to be super short with the vest and the shirts and stuff. That way when he sat down in the wheelchair, his suit didn't bubble out. That's why it always looks so straight and pressed.
Good to know. Getting back to 31's Frankenstein.
Whatever.
Nice bow tie there, Baron Frankenstein.
Yeah, polka dots. Man, you really make out the detail in the fabric and stuff used.
Yes, you can.
Like, I'm not trying to brag this time. I'm being, legitimate. When I watched the DVD version, I couldn't make out all of it.
Yes.
You can even make out the detail in the wall back there. It has pores.
Yes, it does. Baron Frankenstein's rather grumpy, isn't he?
Well, his son is missing.
Yeah.
Look at that guy with the Beethoven haircut.
Well, that's the Bogomeister.
The Burgermeister?
Bogomeister, whatever. Yeah, criticize my
The
pronunciation.
Boogermeister?
Yeah, the Boogermeister. Fuck off.
Is it the Burgermeister? Because the Burgermeister was in, what was that movie?
What, Santa Claus is coming to town?
Yeah, Santa Claus is coming to town. He was the villain in that movie. It all comes full circle.
Oh boy. People are very fond of reading queer subtext into these films because of Whale's real-life orientation, obviously. And though it's pretty blatant in Bride of Frankenstein, you could certainly make a case for this one The fact that Victor is lured away from the pure hetero-Christian love of a traditional marriage to sit in his tower creating a man without the involvement of a woman. Perhaps it's reading a bit much, but it's not totally without precedence. Notice the angles and shadows in this scene.
I mean, there's kind of a phallic symbol there. I mean, if you want to play the
The
gay
cigar?
card, right there in the back, right behind the Van Helsing dude.
His character has a name. It's not important. I don't remember what it is, but
anyhow, that like thing they had on the sheet there kind of made like a phallic symbol there.
this is a good scene and a sympathetic scene. I think it was added to the script to make Henry a more sympathetic character. And it's rather forward-thinking for 1931, him talking about how science is expanding the understanding of the world for everybody, not just for scientists. How the quest to advance science is a noble quest, which is rather at odds with the later films in this genre where the scientists are frequently portrayed as nothing more than madmen tampering in things that were not meant to be tampered in. It's pretty clear there was no motive of that design in this movie. Wales himself was a quite open atheist, I believe. Killer cleft in his chin too, Colin Clive.
Well, I mean, some people got it, some people don't. You could really make it out too on Blu-ray.
I know. Is that a pair of bat wings over Edward von Sloane's head there?
No.
Looks a little bit like it. Boris Karloff himself rather objected to the monster being called the monster. He preferred the creature or the creation. He didn't see the monster as a monster at all, which is part of the reason why he left the series after the third film. He disliked how the character had been degraded from a sympathetic creature to basically a blind, mindless killing machine.
Well, I mean, I can understand that. I mean, especially if you went through and actually read the book before.
Well, yeah, the monster in the book is rather verbose. Spends literally hundreds of pages monologuing about his life. Of course, here's the introduction of the creature for the first time. Notice how James Wales will do a hard cut close-up on the monster's face. Supposedly audiences at the time were so horrified by this they fainted in the runways of the theater.
I mean, I guess my vision of horror is tainted.
Well, certainly very different now. Look at Karloff's body language in this moment. What a wonderful actor he was. The deep,
look at that shadow.
Huge shadow cast on the wall behind him, yeah. Interesting to note that the monster is much more cadaverous looking in this film than he would be in the sequels. Probably it's more to do with the fact that Karloff himself was a lot skinnier at the time, before becoming a famous actor. Well-known anecdote. Karloff was, of course, a veteran of the First World War, and he received an injury and had to have a removable bridge put in his mouth. When he played the monster, he removed the bridge and sucked in his cheek to give it a further cadaverous look. Bride of Frankenstein didn't have that, because the creature, of course, had to be able to speak.
You bastard, I was going to say that. And I mean, the use of practical makeup in these films, what they're able to accomplish with it at this time, when it's basically just really kind of starting to come out.
Well, Jack Pierce made the makeup every day out of his kit, out of wax and things like that. Rubber concrete, stuff of that issue. Here's the monster reaching for the sun. His sunken in doleful eyes really give him the appearance of a childlike innocent. I've developed this theory, JD, that all horror movies are about outsiders. All of them. Every single one. I've yet to find one that didn't in some way conform to that view. And I think these early Universal films are very different from the horror films that would come on later, where the outsider is treated as the sympathetic character instead of as the threatening other. Even Dracula, Count Dracula, has somewhat sympathetic designs. This is beautiful, him holding his hands out in a plaintive, wanting motion. I really think the Frankenstein monster is the iconic outsider in so many ways.
Three syllables. Sedative. Give him a sedative. Sorry.
Oh, this moment where he's in the dungeon, flailing. Fantastic.
Did he hurt his back on us?
Later on in the film, Boris Karloff, when he was carrying Colin Clive up the stairs of the windmill.
This is when he hurt his back.
Yeah, a back injury that would follow him for his entire life. Yeah, Fritz, why are you being such an asshole for no good reason? Okay, here's some really out there gay subtext. Why is Fritz so jealous of the monster, huh? Does this like the fact that the doctor's attention is on him? There's the window I was talking about earlier.
Yeah.
The downward angle view in this scene is wonderful. I see what you're talking about earlier with the cloaked protrusions. Something I've always wondered in this scene coming up here immediately. Did the monster hang Fritz with his whip?
Guess we'll find out, won't we? Although I thought Henry Frankenstein took the whip with him.
Did he? No, because Fritz was whipping the monster before the scene went away.
No, he wasn't. He was chasing around with the torch.
Oh, I guess he was. Another important question.
Isn't he out of his chains in this? Maybe he hung him with the chains.
How did the monster get out of his chains? More importantly, how did the monster know how to tie a noose?
Maybe he put the shackle around Fritz's throat and strangled him and then threw him over the...
Possible. In the book Frankenstein, the doctor is immediately repulsed by the monster as soon as it comes alive. And in this film, the transition is pretty much immediate. At the beginning, the doctor is very open to the monster, hoping to save him and turn him into something great. And as soon as the first kill, his mood totally transitions to it being an abomination that needs to be destroyed. So much for progressiveness.
There's a lot of pyramids in this movie, Zach. I think maybe James Wales was part of the
the Universal monsters are clearly a Freemasonic agenda. Ignore that. We're being facetious, by the way.
I don't know. I mean, they needed some kind of mason to lay all this brick. Maybe a free one. There's some gay subtext for you. The doctor's trying to give the monster his torch, and the monster doesn't want it. It's gay rape.
Okay, I think you're officially reading too much of it. There's a shot of the syringe going in. That was frequently censored. The monster's a raw nerve in this. His reactions are completely id-like. He responds with total feeling and no intellect, much like a child would. Fascinating.
They gave me a sedative. Oh, look, butterflies.
Karloff's hand acting is great in this movie. So much great hand acting.
Well, I mean, you from the way that he uses his hands to show the emotion, you really get what he's trying to convey there. Whereas sometimes in the later, reincarnations of the monster that don't involve Boris Karloff, I feel like that's an element that's missing.
Absolutely.
It is how they try to convey the feelings with the hands.
Well, the monster would become a much stiffer character. Example, Lon Chaney Jr. as the monster in Ghost of Frankenstein was pretty stiff, not to mention Lugosi in the next film. Honestly, Glenn Strange, who played the monster in the last 3 Universal Cycle team-up movies, is a little better than he gets credit for. Tries to give a little emotion to the creature, even though the Frankenstein monster has pretty much nothing to do in those last 3 Cycle films. It's a bummer that pretty much after the 3rd film, the creature would be reduced to lying on a slab for the majority of the movie's runtimes.
Well, it's probably had a lot to do with budget or whatever.
Sure, especially the team-up films where there were multiple makeups to do.
And I really don't like John Carradine's
You've
Dracula.
mentioned your dislike of John Carradine's Dracula before.
Dracula shouldn't have a mustache.
Dracula in the original novel has a mustache.
I don't care. Do I look like a person that reads? No.
Our viewers don't know what you look like at all, JD.
For the record, viewers, or listeners,
He's
if you
incredibly
will,
handsome, right?
I'm incredibly handsome, and I'm a firm believer in why read the book when the movie will be out in a year.
We both have 6-packs. 6 packs of root beer. Hey.
What are you talking about? Everybody wants me at the party because I bring the whole keg.
Wait. Speaking of fashion, did you check out Elizabeth's hat in that earlier moment there?
Yeah, that's clearly 30s.
Baron Frankenstein disappears in between Frankenstein and Bride of Frankenstein. What would happen to the old guy?
He probably died.
Keeled over.
You know, though, you say that you place this film 30 years
Before Son of Frankenstein.
before Son of Frankenstein. How do you know that Son of Frankenstein doesn't take place 30 years in the future?
Because it looks like 1939 and not 1969.
Well, this is like 1931, 1900.
Well, JD, you just have to move some stuff around for allowance. That's why it's called fan wanking and not fan construction.
You know, I also want to point out that in Back to the Future 2,
Jesus.
the 20-year span between 1980 and 2000 or whatever year he was in.
Oh God, I don't know. I'm not a Back to the Future expert.
Anyhow, in the 20-year span, the only thing that had changed was they got hoverboards. And shoes that lace themselves.
Jaws Part 19.
And Jaws Part 19.
The only thing that Back to the Future got right about the 2000s were nostalgia bars. Because 80s nostalgia is huge in today's world. That's the only thing it got right.
Sometimes if you go to a good diner that, is like 1960s, 1950s themed, it's pretty cool. Overacting of the Year award goes to...
Oh, it's not that bad. There's much worse.
If it was any worse, it would be a soap opera.
As I said, women didn't have a lot of good roles in early horror movies. Unless it was Dracula's daughter, anyway.
Or Elsa Lanchester.
Well, Elsa Lanchester is, of course, totally famous and iconic, but the bride's in, maybe 2 minutes of the film.
Yeah, but she can act.
Well, of course you could act.
And she was pretty hot for, a lady that's that died 30 years before I was even born.
I don't know about 30 years.
Well, you get the...
20. What's the motivation behind the monster killing Edward Van Sloan's character here in the upcoming scene?
He's fucking with him.
Delicate.
Well, I mean, you gotta think about it. He's basically
appears to be cutting into him, performing surgery on him.
You know, I mean, I don't mean to sound crude, I guess, but I mean, basically, he's basically got the mentality of like a child with Down syndrome and the strength of 7 men. And the guy's cutting into him without any kind of anesthesia or anything, and...
Oh, I love this scene of the monster coming down the stairs. This set is gorgeous. I wonder if any of this stuff survives.
I wonder how much padding they had to use to make him look that big.
I don't know. I mean, Karloff was a broad-shouldered person.
Well, broad-shouldered, but I mean, like, around the torso. Because, I mean, you know, naturally they use, like, platform boots or whatever to make him so tall.
Well, the suit is oversized, that's for certain.
Undersized.
Whatever. You know what I
mean.
Well,
the sleeves are too short to make him look bigger.
Of course.
But, I mean, I feel like they've used padding around his stomach because, I mean, he was a struggling actor up to this point, really, wasn't he?
Struggling actor during the Depression, so...
I mean, he wasn't eating well, is my point. He probably didn't eat well long after this movie came out, either.
Well, I don't know. After this film, he became a star. And as I said, Karloff was a star up into the early 60s. The guy worked until he died.
Literally.
Yeah.
He probably died on set.
I don't know about that, but I know his last film released was something like The Crimson Cult. It was a movie he shot in Mexico. It was released in the early 70s, and he was already passed away by that point, but Karloff was prolific. He never stopped working. That was pretty much the credos back in the time. There weren't a lot of laws in place to protect actors' salaries and rights, so you had to keep working if you wanted to live comfortably.
And, you know, since we're on the subject of monsters here, Christopher Lee's 90 years old, as we just recently discovered.
Yes.
I mean, maybe, and he's still working, so maybe that's something he picked up from being, you know...
Perhaps, though.
From, like, kind of coming into the...
Well, he's from kind of the same period, a little later, but...
Well, I mean, like, he basically came to be...
Well, you have to realize that Christopher Lee is one of the most prolific actors ever. He's been in hundreds of movies. So the dude has always been busy.
I mean, he's probably been in more movies than, you know, hotel rooms or whatever you want to call it, but...
Okay.
In other words, I want to point... Let's put it this way. He's probably worked more than he has slept in his whole entire life.
That might be a fair assessment. Have you heard Christopher Lee's heavy metal album he's recorded?
There's a Christopher Lee heavy metal album?
He's recorded several. He recorded a Christmas album that was heavy metal. Apparently he's very big into this.
I have...
It's a concept album.
To find this.
It's a concept album about Charlemagne, because Lee claims some sort of heritage to Charlemagne.
I have to find this.
Alright, well, I know it will be YouTubing after the movie. This upcoming scene, we're not quite there yet, but we will be in a few minutes, of Elizabeth being threatened by the monster on her wedding day is one of the few remaining concepts from the original novel. This movie is the loosest of loose adaptations, though to be totally blunt, I prefer it to the novel.
Just out of curiosity, isn't this like the same town that the Wolfman took place in?
No. Because
that street looked like the same one.
Well, it could very well be the same set, but the Wolfman is set in Wales, and this is set in Germany.
Well, I meant set. I'm sorry.
Okay, it could very well be the same set.
No, wait. You know what I'm thinking of? I'm thinking of House of Frankenstein or whatever.
Well, Universal recycled all of these sets, especially with the later films, which were much lower budget. They were B programmers. I've always adored this tracking shot through the village.
If you ever go to the Universal backlot, you can visit this street.
Oh, I doubt very seriously too many of these sets still exist.
Oh no, they do. There's a documentary on one of these that shows it.
Oh, wonderful. Well, awesome. If I ever make it to California, I'll have to do that. Oh,
yeah, they keep
everywhere.
all of their sets.
Interesting transition from the camera moving through the celebrating streets of the village to the monster stumbling through the forest. Wonder if there's any deeper meaning there.
Man, this makes me really want to go back and get that picture.
Oh, from the convention of the color poster of the monster and the little girl. Look at how upset this cat is. That cat is not happy.
And, I mean, I will say I think this movie severely benefits from being black and white.
Oh,
I think if it was...
The cat is pissed off.
I think if this movie was colorized, it would lose a lot of its charm.
God, Zach, I'm trying to have a moment and you can't shut up about the fucking cat.
But the fact that particular picture at the convention, and since it is canon with what we're talking about here, the fact that it just looked like you were actually looking out a window into a lake view and seeing the monster
and the little girl.
I mean, that was just awesome, and I wish I had the money to get that.
It's interesting that her first reaction is a peaceful one. This is really a lovely moment. It's kind of sad that in a modern context you really can't think of anything but pedophilic tendencies while watching this scene, which I don't believe was the intention at all.
Would you like one of my flowers?
I don't know. I mean, the context is pretty much right there. But
I believe
Did you see how beautiful the lake looked?
Isn't it?
I mean, look at that.
I wonder if those mountains are actually there or if that's a matte painting. It's hard to say.
Well, I mean, that lake is clearly there.
Obviously.
You have those, and I'll have these. I can make a boat.
Here's a thought. Monster looking at how tiny the girl's hands are in comparison to his. Has noticed that. It's a wonderful thing about these movies. I've probably seen these Universal monster movies more than I've seen any other film. And every time I see them, I always notice something new. That's why they're classics. And right around here is when the edited versions would have cut. Which is why the quality visibly degrades. I love his utterly horrified look there when he's realized what he's done. Is it just me, or is this moment of him wandering through the woods sped up? Seems like it might be.
I think it was, yeah.
Hey, Polka.
I'll take you to the candy shop.
No, stop.
Keep running. Sorry.
Look at that guy, break it down. That's right, baby, my Lita Houghton's go all the way down. So Elizabeth looks beautiful in her wedding dress.
It's bad luck to see the room before the what?
It certainly is, isn't it?
Don't step on her train.
Though as opposed to the original novel, Elizabeth at least makes it out of this alive.
Yeah, in the novel, she becomes the bride, right?
Sort of. The monster kills her, and then the doctor uses some of her parts to make a mate.
Same difference.
And I believe that was actually the intention in the movie Bride of Frankenstein for Carl to murder Elizabeth and use her heart in making the bride, which is why the bride is attracted to Henry instead of the monster. That obviously didn't make it into the final film, though.
I'm afraid. Terribly afraid. Where's Dr. Bell? Why are you late for the wedding?
Oh, he's always late. He'll be here soon.
Both this film and the sequel, Elizabeth's role as something of the knower of evil. She seems rather attuned with the events of the film. Always. Maybe that's just because women in general have a nervous disposition.
You know, a side note here. Do you happen to notice how Henry Frankenstein's ears are really big?
Okay.
Hold on. Let's see if they do a...
I guess they're pretty large.
No, hold on.
I never noticed her cleavage in the wedding dress before either. Thanks, Blu-ray.
It does have pretty substantial cleavage. So look at that thing. I mean,
Yeah, they're pretty big, aren't they?
I mean,
His
like
ears, not...
I mean, those things will make an elephant jealous. Gee whiz.
Gee whiz is right.
Erbigerd.
Polka dots are very big in the village of Frankenstein. Look at his cummerbund. That's a smart idea. Lock your wife in while there's a monster on the loose.
And even at this time, bridesmaid dresses were still ugly.
It's odd that they hear the monster groaning in this room, and yet he's on the other side of the house. I can't wonder if one of the bridesmaids were maybe a little gassy, and that's what that sound was.
Really?
Yeah, we're not above fart jokes on this show.
Yeah, but that's where you decided to go with this one? I mean, why don't you go once? Never mind.
Check out that broom there. Damn, never noticed that before.
You know what? Maybe the monster took a shit and...
Okay, stop it.
and he went... "Urgh."
Yeah, this too, you can't help but wonder, this is somewhat synonymous with assault. A lot of these early movies can be read as, you know, the monster abducting with the female. You can't help but sort of read something into that. And I kind of think that was probably intentional. The woman is always in peril from the masculine attacker.
Do you think that was an intentional look there?
Absolutely. It doesn't really take a lot for the monster to flee, though. Basically, she screams, and then he hightails it out of there.
Well, I don't mean intentional look, but I mean, like, do you think maybe that was like an intentional...
The noise he made?
Like the fact that we laugh at that, was that intentional? Was the comedy aspect intentional?
Absolutely. I think it was. That seems to fit very much in line with James Whale's cheeky sense of humor. I love this moment where the father carries the dead girl through the village and immediately the celebration stops. Rather stark and creepy, honestly. We haven't commented on the fact that there's almost no music in this movie, as was normal for a film this early in the sound era. Honestly, it doesn't really bother. In Dracula, the lack of music is bothersome, but in Frankenstein, I hardly noticed it at all.
Well, it's because it clearly had a higher budget than Dracula. So,
No,
like...
Probably not. I just feel like the images in Frankenstein are much stronger, so that the lack of sound isn't really a notable issue.
I wonder how many times they had to shoot this scene, though. Because there's no way that girl could just lay there that...
I bet if you watch her carefully, you might be able to see the actress breathing. Certainly doesn't take a lot to get these villagers to riot, though, that's for sure. That's one thing young Frankenstein spoofed perfectly. I think it's about time we have one.
Yeah, but I really like that scene, though, where he's walking through that tunnel, and you just see him in front of all the villagers, and he's carrying...
And you can see their faces sink as the dead body passes by.
No, I'm talking about, like, right there. Like, when he came through that hallway there, so to speak, or that tunnel. Like, when he was in front of the crowd carrying them, or the crowd was coming behind him there. Just go with it.
I'm going with it. Check out the pants Colin Cloud was wearing in this scene. I want to talk about weird fashion.
Yeah, I don't know.
It works both ways, because if somebody from 1931 looked at pictures of people today, they would comment on how odd they found the fashion.
Maybe. How do you think Sonic would feel about our style?
The Hedgehog?
No, the Boom. Yeah, Sonic the Hedgehog.
I don't know. He would probably wonder why we're all wearing pants.
How do you know that he doesn't wear a suit that gives him his blue color?
Okay, we're not having this conversation.
Frankenstein, you will take to the mountains. Those are your people. I will lead the
It's interesting in the later sequels, the villagers totally turn against the Frankenstein family as nothing but makers of monsters. Why, in this first movie, Henry's pretty proactive about tracking the monster down with them. He's obviously redemptive.
what the fiend must be found. Are you ready? Your forces and go.
Yeah, I don't see a single pitchfork.
Yeah, I don't know where the pitchforks come from. Because you've never seen them. They have like clubs and torches, nothing more.
Honestly, you know what this reminds me of? This is silly. Beauty and the Beast. The women cowering and the men running off with their torches to hunt down the monster. Though I suspect it was probably the other way around as far as influences go.
Say what? You lost me on that one.
But never mind.
I was only half paying attention.
In Beauty and the Beast, the riot song,
Uh-huh.
where they grab up the stick your courage to the sticking point,
Yeah.
it's time to kill the beast.
Yeah.
This doesn't remind you of that?
Well, it does, but you said kind of the opposite.
Well, yeah, obviously that film was influenced by this one and not the other way around.
Okay, now I'm on the same page.
I'm glad we cleared that up. I'm sure our viewers were happy to hear it.
Hear my stupidity? I'm sure they were. I give character to the show, Zach, with my stupidity.
Okay, is Mr. Mash stupid or is Mr. Bangers obtuse?
Mr. Bangers is obtuse. Yeah,
How do they know the monster's in the hills?
I don't know. Maybe they got monster radar. Or maybe his cadaverous smell.
Yeah, I bet the Frankenstein monster doesn't smell that good.
I mean, he's basically scorched, dead flesh.
Yeah. These clouds behind these rocks are pretty clearly a matte painting, though. In fact, on Blu-ray, that's even more obvious. Kind of like it, though. One of the things I love about these movies is they have their own sense of reality. It's one of the reasons why I think they're so widely emulated, this weird sense of individuality the movies have. It's pretty immediately recognizable.
Yeah, you can really...
Yes. But the villagers in silhouette against that sky, that's something. Man, these dogs have no friggin' clue where they're going. Just one of the rules of dramatic supply is that Henry would of course be the one to find the monster. Wouldn't be as interesting otherwise.
Well, of course. We belong to... Oh, wait, wrong movie.
I think he's up there. What do you think the monster's motivations in confronting his creator are?
You motherfucker die, you?
Something I notice is he grabs his creator and runs off into a tower. It's almost as if After experiencing a frightening world that rejects him, his first instinct is to grab one of the few familiar faces he knows and crawls into someplace familiar.
Well, back to your motivation question. I really think it's more of a...
There's a little bit of blood there, not something you'd expect to see in a 1931 horror movie. Anyway, continue.
And it shows up really well, Blu-ray, by the way.
Yes, it does.
But, you know, I believe that his motivation is kind of like daddy issues.
Oh, yeah, obviously.
I mean, like, you know, he loves his father, who ultimately rejects him and everything that the monster basically stands for.
In light of the parental rejection, his actions almost seem reasonable. Of course he's upset.
I mean, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
I mean, now would I climb up into the top of a windmill so they can, you know, cause me to die? No.
Well, later on when he hears the scene where Karloff injured his back, well, when he tosses Henry from the tower, I sort of read it as him saying, "Here, you want him back? Here you go." Certainly seems in keeping with the monster's logic. Where'd they get that log?
I don't know. They said plot to Verata Nicto, and it appeared. 2 points to whoever can guess what movie that's from.
Well, actually, it's...
I'm talking about for our viewers, or our listeners. We'll give them 2 points to win an imaginary prize that doesn't actually exist if they can tell me what movie that's from.
I mean, if you're reading the movie from a sympathetic angle to the monster, all his actions are pretty clearly the result of being afraid.
And being mad at his dad.
Yeah.
And I mean, basically, you know, like I said, he's got the brain of a child with like Down syndrome.
This shot is beautiful. The two faces in between the spinning gears of the mill.
You know, they're cheering the monster on right now.
I feel like they're cheering him on. I don't really understand why they're yelling, though. It doesn't seem very productive. It's a shame the dummy in this scene is so obvious. And yet
Really
he
obvious on Blu-ray.
survives. Yeah. Wait. He's okay.
And see, even right there, you see the monster, and he's looking down like, "Oh my God, what have I done?"
Exactly. I was just thinking the same thing.
You know, this is a simple case of he's lashed out against his father, and
He's clearly afraid. Look at the look on his face while they light the mill. He's horrified.
you know he's afraid of.
It's a monster with a conscience.
You know, he's afraid of everything that's going on, and you know, he clearly shows remorse for some of his actions. So.
No wonder teenagers love these movies so much. He's confused and doesn't really know what he's doing and
has
lashing out
daddy
at the
issues.
world. Yeah, seriously.
That, and when you're a teenager, that's when you really start to actually appreciate,
Oh yeah,
like, subtle things in films, you know?
exactly.
When you're, like, you know, 7 and 8 years old, you're
You don't
like,
really pick up on that.
you're like, oh,
subtle-
look, fire!
Yeah, you don't really pick up on the subtle nuances of these movies. Yeah, there's some stodgy effects for you there. So which do you think is a better film, JD? Frankenstein or Bride of Frankenstein?
I don't know. I mean, I would say the production value is better on Bride,
Yeah, absolutely.
but I think the overall characterization is better in this film.
I agree. Obviously, Bride of Frankenstein is a slicker movie, but I feel like the starkness and rawness of this movie actually improves it in certain regards. This scene here is pretty clearly tacked on. Henry surviving. It's hard to tell if that's even Colin Clive in the bed there. Could be a dummy for all we know. And now with the impurity banished, Henry can return to the pure Christian marriage. Traditional values survive for another day.
And why are doctors always so old in these films?
Well, it takes a long time to get through medical school.
Yeah, but I mean, like, that guy's on his way to his deathbed.
Well, it's a universal picture. It certainly is.
And that would be the end, guys.
Well, I just love this movie so much, and getting to see it on Blu-ray is incredible. Now, of course, we see Boris Karloff's name in the credit, and a good cast is worth repeating, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Well, we could probably talk about this for longer if we wanted to, but I think we'll cut it off here. I hope you enjoyed listening to this little bonus episode.
And please let us know what you thought.
Absolutely. Always. Feedback is appreciated. BANGERSNMASH88 if you wish to email. Like us on Facebook if you want to. Don't rush out and do it or anything, but
we're certainly there. We check it constantly. We check it about
far more than it warrants, that's for certain.
I mean, I pretty much check it at least once every 2 days.
Certainly comment on the YouTube feed if you want to. And I hope you enjoyed the show. As always, I am Mr. Bangers, a.k.a. Zach.
And I am Mr. Mash, a.k.a. JD.
Real show next time. Promise.
Unless, of course, you really like this, then this was a real show.